Hello, this is Gav from IGN. I'm joined by Alex, and this week the PlayStation turned 20 years old. PS1 is 20.
It is indeed.
You remember coming out, right?
I was working on a PlayStation mag when PlayStation 1 came out, so
Wow.
I've been doing this
Long time.
20 years.
Wow.
But yeah, to celebrate, we thought that we'd go through the UK team and ask us your favourite PlayStation games from that era. Now, the first one that we're going to look at is my favourite, which is Metal Gear Solid, which obviously, has since become somewhat of a kind of defining game for for PlayStation.
For everything, yeah.
But for everything, exactly, yeah. At the time, I remember very vividly, not really hearing anything about Metal Gear Solid. It just came out of nowhere, and I remember the guy from Konami brought in a brief demo of it, and I thought, oh, this is pretty good. But then the more you play it, and the more you kind of, you figure out Snake is like the ultimate badass.
Yeah.
David Hayter as his voice is perfect.
Yeah.
And at the time, you'd never really kind of played anything kind of to this kind of
Definitely
scale.
No. I think my first memory of it is when somebody said, "Oh, there's a bit in it, right, where you have to have a cigarette and you have to blow smoke to be able to," and I was like, my little tiny mind couldn't comprehend the fact that you had to use something like just in the real world to find lasers or something.
For me, it's defined the stealth genre.
Yeah.
This was the game that really kind of put stealth on the map, and the first time you see the exclamation mark from being spotted from the guard, you properly crap your pants.
Definitely, yeah. I think I remember just not getting it either.
Yeah.
For me, PlayStation, the reason it's such an important part of my life is I played a lot of my first types of games on.
At this point in the game, you're not really given any information at all. You're just dropped in there. You can see the kind of the cones of view from the kind of bad guys, but you just think, what do I do? And if you try and fight, well, you've not really got anything, so you'll die very quickly. Yeah. See, looking back now, it doesn't look so great, but back then it was like, this is like the most cinematic game I've ever kind of seen, even from the way that you're getting the kind of credits appearing as you're playing.
Exactly,
it's so cinematic and ahead of its time, and obviously, it's pretty standard kind of commonplace stuff these days. But at the time, revolutionary. But I think not just like Metal Gear Solid 1, but probably the best thing about all Metal Gears are probably the characters. Snake is obviously one of them, but some of the bosses. And
oh yeah, man.
Metal Gear 3, some of the most amazing. But in this game, you've got Revolver Ocelot, an ultimate badass, like gunslinging kind of 6-shooter dude with an awesome ponytail. Vulcan Raven, big chap with a very, very large gun. And then Sniper Wolf. And the thing that was beautiful about all of these is that each boss was treated differently. You had to beat it in a different way. And, it wasn't just kind of like, right, what's the biggest gun I can get? How do I beat it? And I think probably no better place to kind of illustrate that was with the Psycho Mantis fight.
Man, yeah.
Which is absolutely my favourite boss in Metal Gear Solid. Like, Psycho Mantis... like, spoilers if you haven't played it already. We'll talk about that fight briefly. But yeah, basically what happens is this guy can read your mind. And if you've got your memory card in the PlayStation, which hopefully you have, because otherwise you'll have to start the game from scratch every single time, he will kind of tell you what other Konami games you've been playing through dialogue, and then kind of basically takes control of the controller. You have to unplug the controller, put it in slot 2 to kind of fight him. Otherwise, you're basically rendered helpless. And that... nothing else.
No.
It's kind of, even today, nothing else really kind of comes close to that in terms of like the ingenuity of using the technology in a different way.
I don't think anyone could do, because it was such a big thing. I don't think anybody else could do something like that without them going, "Oh, you're just copying Psycho Mantis."
Yeah. And even there was a bit where you had to enter a passcode for a door. Yeah. And that was printed on the back of the box.
Right. Yeah.
Which is obviously pre-internet days.
Yeah.
Piracy was a thing. Yeah. But if you didn't know that code, you ain't going nowhere. Yeah. And you couldn't look it up on Google.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Because Google didn't exist.
Google didn't exist.
I think it's a good one. I think it's a really, really strong one. I think it's one of the ones that, everybody... I think every single person who had a PS1 had this game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even, playing Ground Zeroes recently... the kind of its premise is still very, very similar. Obviously, the world and the scope you've got is a lot more open. You're much freer to kind of do anything. But the basics, the hallmarks of the franchise are still there. And, for me, Metal Gear has, not only defined PlayStation for me, but it's probably defined much of my kind of love of games. Metal Gear was up there back then. It's up there right now.
Excellent. Well, that's day 1 of our PlayStation memories. Come back for day 2, where we'll be talking to somebody else about what they remember about the PlayStation.